The Fallout series has a massive problem that, in my opinion, ruins about half of the games in the main Fallout franchise. And more notably, The Outer Worlds, which is one of the biggest Fallout spiritual successors, attempts to, but ultimately fails at fixing this problem. Now you see, in my 3-hour Fallout New Vegas video, I had a small segment titled Fallout 4's Raider Problem. The biggest way to boil down my argument is that in Fallout 3 and 4, you'll be wandering down the street, and then all of a sudden, a random enemy simply titled Raider will start attacking you. In these situations, your only responses are to either fight back or run away. And while gunfights are pretty fun, it lacks a lot of depth from an RPG standpoint. For games within a franchise that has such intense factions and such a complete open world, I find it surprising that these games haven't solved this issue when Fallout New Vegas has already shown us how to solve it. You see, settlements and outposts in New Vegas are almost always tied to a faction of the game, meaning different settlements and outposts will be hostile to you depending on what factions you side with. While there's some basic enemy factions that are similar to raiders like the Fiends, Vipers, Jackals, and Scorpions, within the main story, there's still ways that you can interact with these factions. The Fiends, for instance, I'm pretty sure there's a way in which you can get your way into the base and talk to the leader. And more importantly, these groups feel like they're actually rooted within the world itself. Instead of just having a random raider outpost at a random point in the map, the different factions have bases of operation. They have a hierarchy and structure, which blends them into the overarching faction-based design of Fallout New Vegas. I mean, I understand how in a post-apocalyptic setting, raiders can suddenly form factions and small groups within the world, but don't you think that these smaller outposts of raiders would have been completely eradicated within just a few years? A point I made in that video is that in New Vegas, you're encouraged to deal with the somewhat hostile groups like the Great Khans. In Fallout 3 and 4, these more aggressive and tribal groups would simply be labeled as raiders, but in Fallout New Vegas, they serve as an actual part of the world, with their own quest lines that you can choose and follow. Sure, you're handed the ability to outright kill them, treat their base like a raider camp from Fallout 4, which actually is a viable solution within the main quest line, but you also have the ability to talk to them, to understand them, to treat them as a greater part of the world. It makes the choices you make feel actually integral to the world around you, and it grounds the player into a living, breathing society of factions. But now that I think I've made my point clear, let's shift to The Outer Worlds, Obsidian's recent 2019 first-person RPG. While The Outer Worlds attempts to solve the raider problem, or as I'll call it, the marauder problem for this game, the game ultimately fails because it lacks the greater world design to have complex factions and quest lines. But to understand that, I'll have to explain a bit more what The Outer Worlds does differently from the main Fallout franchise. Okay, so some of you may argue that it's unfair to compare The Outer Worlds to Fallout, or hell, even Obsidian's earlier title, Fallout New Vegas. But I think it's completely relevant given how much inspiration this game is obviously taken from Fallout. For instance, the game literally had from the makers of Fallout New Vegas in one of the initial trailers, and also the general structure of the game, the way it's paced, things like the end credit narration, it's completely ripped out of Fallout. And I mean, that's not bad, this game just takes very heavy inspiration, but that still means this game was attempting to pick up that sort of Fallout New Vegas fanboy audience. And the fact that they still have this raider problem that's present in Fallout 3 and 4 is apparent that they failed in many regards to sort of have the same world design as New Vegas. But nonetheless, they still have this marauder problem that I think is a huge issue between Fallout 3, 4, and now The Outer Worlds. Okay, so Fallout is a retro-future version of the 1950s sort of Cold War-ish American exceptionalism world. Think about what's found in, let's say, a Norman Rockwell painting, but instead sort of shift this to how the people of the 50s would have imagined their world to look like with 100 years of nuclear technology advancements. Then you have to think of that world, but blown to bits by nuclear Armageddon. I talk about this much more in depth in my New Vegas video, and Shamus Young, rest in peace, has possibly the best video explaining the actual aesthetic of Fallout. Because it's not just sort of a futuristic 50s version of the world, it's a lot deeper than that. The Outer Worlds is similarly a retro-future-ish setting, but it's more of a sort of science fiction pulp version of the 1920s. This means that the line between the Outer Worlds and Fallout is sometimes even blurred because Fallout also sort of delves into that 1920s flapper Art Deco aesthetic.
Darla, where are you going?
Home, Skinny, where I should have been all this time.
But I'd say the biggest difference overall is actually that the characters in the Outer Worlds feel a lot more sophisticated than those in Fallout. Of course, that's partially because there wasn't some huge catastrophe in the Outer Worlds universe, or at least one that's readily apparent in the base set of lore that they give you. I mean, not to spoil anything, but by the end you realize something weird is possibly happening back on Earth. But anyways, there's no massive atomic bombs dropped in the Outer Worlds. It's sort of just a retro-future 1920s pulp science fiction-y world, except that world was blasted to outer space, and a bunch of greedy corporations took over. Dude, the fucking corporations. My biggest pet peeve with the Outer Worlds is it leans way too heavily into this commoditized corporate version of the distant future. People you meet are often slaves to their corporation, and they're forced to say things like slogans and taglines within their everyday conversations.
You've tried the best now. Now try the rest. Spacer's choice. Oh, wow, that stings. Oh, we're all part of the Spacer's Choice family here. Not that I deserve to be. Can't even deliver a company slogan.
This means that the corporations are less like factions, but they're more like a fascist government that rules everything. This is absolutely terrible for two big reasons. First of all, you barely interact with the corporations themselves. In Fallout, there's the remnants of huge corporations. There's Vault Tech and Nuka-Cola. But the cool thing about these things is that you're sort of uncovering their history as you play. There is corporate greed, but you're uncovering the ruins of the world that was completely eradicated by bombs. And these bombs, of course, are partially caused by that corporate greed. But in the Outer Worlds, these corporations actually exist. And what do? Absolutely fucking nothing. You very rarely interact with these corporations on an interesting level. They're sort of just there as you make your way through the main story. They're not really anything but a presence. Compare that to, of course, the factions in games like Fallout New Vegas, even Fallout 4. In these games, these huge factions, you can actually interact with them. But let me give you an example inside the Outer Worlds itself. You see, the first area of the game is a place called Emerald Vale, which has the town of Edgewater, and the main producing corporation of this town is the Spacer's Choice Salt Tuna Factory. They're strict and harsh, and they deny health insurance like greedy CEOs. On the other side of Emerald Vale are... I don't even fucking remember what they're called. That's because they don't have a name. They're just deserters of Edgewater, and they've deserted far away to the botanical labs. They're essentially on strike against the town because they want more rights, healthcare, and to be seen as people, not slaves. I mean, fine. I mean, I shit on Fallout 4 equally for having, like, the most surface-level slavery plotline as well.
The Institute treats synths as property. That sounds like slavery. Exactly.
But this is, like, even lower hanging fruit than that.
This hat, my job. It may not seem like much to a brave space captain, but they're all that I have.
At least there they have this sort of analogy with the synths. In this game, it's just the corporations treat people unfairly. So the starting area is essentially good versus bad, and that's not the worst thing in the world because hell, New Vegas does something very similar with the town of Goodsprings. What troubles me is how convoluted the game sets up the conflict for the player. So the main questline has you switching the power off for one of these two cities, either Edgewater or the Deserters. One has to live and one has to die. So the reason to keep Edgewater and the Corpo Greed Boys alive is because the majority of the population actually lives there. The reason to keep the Deserters alive is because they're anti-slavery. And there's a third option that isn't even explained to you. This is basically just convincing the leader of the slavery guys to kill himself.
If Adelaide's found a way to feed her people and cure the plague, then she deserves this office more than I do.
It really isn't that well explained. And once you do this, the Deserters will actually come back and join the main town. I love Goodsprings, even if it is a very binary questline of good versus bad. Partially because to choose the bad guys, you really have to go out of your way to find them. And the rest of the game largely avoids this sort of one or the other structure. But the Outer Worlds uses it constantly. Throughout many of the major arcs through the game, you're forced to essentially just decide between two complete opposites. And alternatively, there's often a secret ending that just spares them both. In fact, later on in the game, one of the secret endings for one of the quest lines allows you, of course, to bring peace to both sides of the conflict, but it was so convoluted that I couldn't even complete it. I did a very high honor playthrough and I still got gated out of it for no reason other than there was a sort of arbitrary quota I had to meet. I chose a wrong option literally hours before my playthrough. And mind you, it didn't seem like a sort of explicitly wrong option, it was just making a standard choice in an RPG. And so despite having almost maxed out my charisma stats for, you know, persuasion and lying, I couldn't complete this secret ending of the game because they arbitrarily said, no, you can't, you're gated out of it. It led to this really shitty moment in which this NPC essentially says, hey, in another life I would have agreed with you, but not this time.
So no, in another life, maybe that could have worked out for all of us. In this one, we're going to war.
It's literally the developers saying, yeah, you didn't do it right. Play again and find the secret option. I also just want to clarify that I'm not simply upset that they're gating you out of choices. Many of my favorite RPGs, in fact, constantly gate the player out of storylines depending on what they're doing. But my main complaint with the Outer Worlds is it's not entirely clear what causes this to happen. Unlike other games that are very intentional with these choices, the Outer Worlds seems to throw them around willy-nilly, and it doesn't feel nearly as impactful or deliberate as other games. Anyways, my point so far is that this corporate agenda behind the Outer Worlds sort of very simply divides the land up between a few very basic factions. And in doing so, there's not a whole lot of moral complexity that they throw at the player. And this is what mostly causes the Marauder problem in my eyes. The way that the Outer Worlds allows the player to engage with combat is they just throw waves upon waves of Marauders at you. And they're completely unnamed Marauders, just like the Raiders in Fallout 3, 4, 76. They pad out the world with predictable outposts that make absolutely no sense. In fact, I'm gonna make a concession for you guys right now. I understand the Raiders in Fallout 4. You see, it's sort of a theme within post-apocalyptic settings to just have crazy people running around. And the Raiders are exactly this. They allow you to play out this post-apocalyptic fantasy that everybody has. Ooh, I'm the lone hero and I'm gonna kill all these evil, crazy Raiders. In fact, I can prove this because in Fallout 4, people very rarely mention Raiders unless it's a part of like a Minutemen questline. You have to take out these Raiders that are at this base. And so then throughout your main playthrough, the Raiders will just randomly show up, and it's sort of accepted. This is sort of just to allow you to do combat because you're having a post-apocalyptic power fantasy. But the Marauders in the Outer Worlds feel a lot different and not as interesting or useful. And partially that's because the Outer Worlds is set around high-tech space travel. It's set around a space setting where anything can happen. But within this, there's very inhospitable worlds. For instance, there's many towns that have high walls and defenses, but they're still barely staying alive. The natural predators of the world and the toxicity of everything around them is still threatening their everyday life. And that's despite living in these huge towns with high walls. But then there's just Marauders chilling in the street, like a block away from raptidons that are gonna eat them immediately, a block away from these insects that spit acid at people. And look, these Raiders are literally chilling right next to a vat of toxic sulfur gas liquid. You get the point. Why are they here? There's no reason. They're just standing in the road. They're not defending anything really. They don't have any beds. They're not living here. They're just standing in the middle of the road in a place that's known to have wildlife that just kills people instantly. Now this leads me to how the game tries to solve this problem. You see, the Outer Worlds has two released DLCs, Murder on Adrenos and Peril on Gorgon. Both of them are sort of Inspector mystery type deals. On the DLC that doesn't really matter that much for this video, Murder on Adrenos, it's actually pretty fun because you're investigating the murder of a famous known actress known as Halcyon Helen. But something on Murder on Adrenos that I want to mention is how it has a very shitty reveal. You see, as you play, you'll find these people who are suspiciously happy all the time. They look like shitty skibbity toilet Gmod NPCs because of this stupid smile they decided to give them. And additionally, they all have these slugs on their neck. And then also, as you play, more and more slug-controlled NPCs inhabit the world. They're automatically aggressive to you, and it's obvious that these slugs are doing something to their brain to make them evil. But for some reason, the entire plot just ignores this. Nobody mentions it. In your main investigation, where you look at the usual suspects for Halcyon Helen's murderer, everyone seems to ignore the fact that these brain-eating slugs are infecting absolutely everyone around them. And so I said, fuck it, I'll ignore this too. It's like an everyday occurrence. Everybody's ignoring this thing. It must have no relevance, because at this point I had been playing for hours, so if this was important, surely somebody would even just mention, hey, those people are a little weird. But no, it turns out that this is the big twist, that these slugs did the murder. I'm not even mad to spoil it. It's stupid. It's a very stupid twist. This is a shitty twist that isn't even a twist. The game refuses to let you investigate the thing that's very obviously behind this whole thing, which means that you will probably know what the big twist is, and the game just ignores it as though these things don't exist. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because this twist is bad, but it doesn't really matter. Peril on Gorgon has a twist that's bad, and it matters because they attempt to retcon the Marauder problem. Essentially, in the DLC Peril on Gorgon, you're exploring the abandoned asteroid of Gorgon, and on this there's the abandoned Spacer's Choice factories and facilities. You'll be exploring and you're realizing they were doing weird experiments, and more importantly, it seems as though Marauders sort of instantaneously showed up and started ravaging the place. You find out that they were developing a drug called adrenotime. They were studying its special abilities, and you instantly know exactly what's gonna happen. The Marauders were caused by adrenotime! Yay! This twist sucks as well! This big twist that the drug is the reason behind the Marauders at least comes sort of soon, and you find out maybe halfway through the DLC. And a lot of the DLC is actually discovering sort of the secrets behind the scientists and why they decided to sort of cover up these experiments and their mentality behind it. And so you often aren't really trying to discover this actual twist, which makes it at least a little better. And there's no real point into talking about the rest of this DLC because the whole point I'm trying to make is about the Marauders. The fact that adrenotime is what's causing the Marauders to exist because, ooh, the drug is driving them crazy, is so thinly veiled and doesn't work at all. It doesn't feel like a real discovery because in my opinion, I feel like Obsidian is trying to retcon the fact that they put Marauders all over the world of the Outer Worlds, and they regret doing it because it makes absolutely no sense. They want to say, oh, those Marauders, they actually weren't random, they were there for a good reason. But that reason is lame, and more importantly, it doesn't fix the issue. The issue is that there's stupid Marauders everywhere. There's still this sort of feeling that they're trying to force you to have these gunfights, and I'm not saying that the gunfights are bad. I do really enjoy the combat in the Outer Worlds, but the thing is, sometimes you do have gunfights, and it feels genuine. For instance, in a part of the main questline, you get boarded. Essentially, in the game, you fly around a ship, and suddenly a bunch of enemies try to board your ship. They dock onto you, and you have to take them out. This is really cool because it feels like a random event out of Fallout 1 or something, and more importantly, it showed that the developers at Obsidian know how to make combat feel worthwhile. And again, this isn't the only example. Throughout the game, there's some really good combat segments that feel warranted. It feels like they give a really good reason for why you're shooting people. But that doesn't help the fact that more than half the time, it's probably gonna be fucking Marauders. Even knowing the Marauders' backstory, I didn't care at all. And something really important to note is that this is sort of trying to make the corporations the big reason behind the Marauders. Oh, look how evil the corporations are. They're the reason why Marauders exist. And this would be cool, except you're told from the very first questline that the corporations suck. They treat humans like slaves. I don't need any more reasons to hate the corporations. This twist doesn't do anything to enhance their presence in the world, because the Outer Worlds is constantly trying to make the story matter, make it feel like it's something you should care about. But it's so hard when Spacer's Choice, Auntie Cleo, Rizzo's, all of the corporations act like amorphous entities that want nothing to do with your main mission. The side missions often similarly fail at instilling smaller factions because the choices you make for them comes down to a binary yes or no. It's what I was talking about earlier. It's usually simply just good versus bad. And this all ties to the Marauder problem because randomly occurring Marauders are there because these quest lines, these factions, aren't strong enough to have combat for their own sake. In Fallout 3 and 4, the fact that New Vegas exists shows that they do have competent enough factions to have good combat encounters. But in the Outer Worlds, it feels almost solely because they need to fluff out the world because the factions are pretty shit. In the Fallout series, you'll be killing droves of super mutants alongside the Brotherhood of Steel, or engaging with interesting enemies like there's those psychedelic researching raiders who are trying to find out the secret behind, what was her name? The fucking old woman who's with the Minutemen. It's not as good as Fallout New Vegas, but I can see a world where Fallout 4 evolves into a better game without the raider problem. The Outer Worlds, on the other hand, these Marauders are there not because the designers were too lazy to implement factions a specific way, but because the factions simply aren't intense or important enough for them to actually put them in the way of the player. The corporations aren't interesting enough to add interesting gameplay moments. And again, this is a big argument, and I'm not trying to bash any specific game here. I love Fallout 3 and 4. I really enjoyed the Outer Worlds. And yeah, I'll always be a New Vegas fanboy, and part of the reason why I probably don't love the Outer Worlds is because it doesn't live up to New Vegas. But nonetheless, even if I'm judging these qualities on its own, the capitalist critiques in the Outer Worlds isn't that cool. I'm not some, ooh, I hate it when people judge capitalism, that sucks. Judging capitalism is cringe. I don't think it's cringe, I actually think it's really, really interesting, and some games do it really well. But the fact that the Outer Worlds does it poorly is what I'm kind of upset about. The fact that the game was advertised as from the creators of New Vegas. Of course, I'm instantly drawn to nitpick it for this reason. And it's funny because I would say that the combat in the Outer Worlds is likely better than almost any other Fallout game. The world design is so unique and captivating. I love the colorful planets and the environments. And while the environmental storytelling isn't as good as some of the Fallout titles, the dialogue and storytelling from Obsidian is still absolutely captivating as ever. It still is very evident that Obsidian has the juice in them to create good RPGs. Just look at the CRPGs that they've known to put out. These are absolutely fantastic. But since having my world shaken by New Vegas and even gone on to play games like Planescape Torment, Disco Elysium, Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, and many others, I really look for this intense narrative design that's both philosophical and complex, and the Outer Worlds hits things way too hard in the nose. It's way too readily apparent exactly what they're critiquing, exactly what they have problems with. I kind of haven't really been wanting to mention the sequel to the Outer Worlds because I'm scared it'll make this video age poorly, but I think it's really interesting that the latest gameplay trailer for the Outer Worlds 2 almost solely showed off its combat.
And like all good sequels, we've included everything that should have been in the first game. More action. More weapons.
And having just played the Outer Worlds and seen that 70% if not more of the game is talking and quest lines, it's kind of scary that this is the big difference that they're trying to show off. No. The storylines that everybody was critiquing, that's not what we're fixing with this game. We're fixing the combat. And to drive this point even further, look at one of those initial trailers for the Outer Worlds. They really wanted to show off all of the different roles you can play as. And I'm not saying that the Outer Worlds 2 won't have any talking. I'm saying that I know the game will have a ton of it. But it's just weird that they're choosing to only show off the combat as of now. Especially with the sort of cliffhanger ending of the original game, I'm so much more interested in how they take the story. And so as a fan of the original game, this trailer is worrying. I actually published an entire article that I'll link below about why I think action-focused titles are ruining RPGs, and it shares many of the points that I've made throughout this video thus far. But if you take one thing from this video essay, is that games are often created for and marketed towards the most common audience, and of course, part of that are people that just love combat. And again, I wouldn't be surprised if that's partially the reason behind my Marauder problem. I love narrative RPGs, and New Vegas definitely deserves some recognition above all the others for solving the problems that Fallout, the Outer Worlds, and practically every other AAA RPG faces, but nonetheless, there's no real solution, because these games will continue to be made with the bare-bones faction and character alignment systems. They'll continue to be made with weaker and weaker narratives, where I can guess the twists literally hours before they're even revealed. And ultimately, I just pray that some more like-minded individuals begin to design these games for the true RPG interactive narrative beauty that they deserve to be. And maybe I should just play games and talk about the games that don't get me completely riled up. And yeah, because of this video, I'll definitely try to do that more in the future for sure. And I think my point has been made, so I'll leave the rest of the discussion up to you. If you leave any comments, I'm very likely going to read them, and I'm open to discussing with you guys whatever you have to say about this issue that I'm talking about. And as usual, there's a good chance that there's something that I missed. So if there is, make sure to tell me and call me a fucking idiot. Anyways, yeah, that's the video. Ring, ring, ring. Ring, 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 telephone.